The United Nations General Assembly on AIDS, the special session on AIDS in 2001 was very significant in that it was the first time that governments sat down together and declared their intention to have a coordinated response to HIV and AIDS. It also recognized some of the gap between the response to HIV in the industrialized countries versus the response in the developing countries, and saw the fact that a very small amount of money was being spent for the response in the developing countries when in fact the overwhelming burden of HIV was felt there. Many of the traditional funding countries or donor countries are saying, we've spent a great deal of money on HIV and AIDS already, so let's change and we prioritize something else. Also, in many cases, humanitarian assistance is built upon a response to emergency situations. And those emergency situations are expected to be resolved after the world community responds for 1 month, 2 months, maybe a year. And yet HIV is a long-term structural problem. And so countries are saying, we should be finished with that problem by now. They're tired of dedicating large amounts of money to HIV. It has consequences for the general response to HIV, especially now that we have found the effectiveness of the combination antiretroviral medications to keep people alive. They're not cured of HIV, but they are able to be kept alive and to have a certain decent quality of life and to return to a more normal life than previously when they became ill of life-threatening illnesses and died very quickly. So when we encourage people to go on to these medications, we also have to understand that this is taking a responsibility for their whole life to keep them on those medications. So it's tremendously catastrophic if now the global community says we no longer want to dedicate these resources to people living with HIV. The special consequences that those cutbacks in AIDS funding have for the Catholic organizations is that I believe that as Catholic organizations, we feel even more the responsibility to keep people on the medications, since we have encouraged them to go on those medications, and we feel very much the sacredness and the value of that human life. And so now we're faced with a real dilemma. As a church, we cannot afford to pay for all of the medications, even for all the people we have on medication already, let alone put additional numbers of people who need to be on those medications, and to say that we can take care of funding this for their entire lifespan. I think the African bishops have articulated very, very clearly and very loudly the general teaching of the Church in terms of the sacredness of human life from conception to natural death, and also have focused on the whole person. We cannot simply treat HIV as a disease, and a disease that's resolved by giving certain medications, but we have to take the whole person in the context of all of their challenges that they face. And especially, we need to look at the social and the development and the psychological as well as the spiritual aspects of responding to their situation of HIV and walking together with them. So I think the African bishops have articulated that very, very clearly, because they see the whole person in a much larger context than the person might be seen in other cultural contexts where we cut up and we specialize our response to people according to certain areas of our own concern or specialization. Well, I think one of the pluses is that our response to HIV and to people living with HIV and affected by HIV is based on long-term eternal values. And so again, we know that we cannot just look for the quick fix solution, but that we need to take the context of the whole person, and also take the context of that person's relationship with God and God's unconditional love for every single human being. being. So that's a very big plus that we have as the Catholic Church. The other issue is that we know that people need to grow toward maturity, and that we as a church must accompany them in their growth toward maturity. Sometimes some other faith communities, and especially the scientific, the technical world, look for a simple solution. If that doesn't work, then they jump on to another solution. Whereas I believe in the Catholic Church, we're there with the person on a long-term basis. The person may not be able to follow completely the teaching of the church at this moment. We do not abandon that person, but we also don't abandon our teachings and our principles. We try to walk together as the person grows to maturity. And I think this is very, very important as we talk about the need for behavior change with regard to those behaviors that might put people at risk for HIV transmission or infection. Well, first of all, I think that that at times we in the Catholic Church absorb the criticism of others and think there's something wrong with our teaching. I personally believe that the Catholic Church teaching is very valid and scientifically based, evidence-based. We teach that people need to restrict sexual activity to the context of a faithful, mutually faithful, and long-term, lifelong marriage. That's good science as well as good theology. So I don't think we have to apologize for our teaching about HIV prevention or about sexual relationships in general. Secondly, I think that we, in the context of the special context of a discordant couple, there are two bishops' conferences that have included a reflection on that special issue within their overall pastoral statement on HIV. The Southern African Bishops' Conference in 2001, and then the Chad Bishops' Conference statement on AIDS in 2002. And in both cases, they make the point that that the situation of a couple where one partner is infected and the other partner is not infected, that those spouses themselves need to come to the final solution of how to deal with trying to prevent the transmission during sexual intercourse. And they make the point that this is such an intimate space, the marital relationship, within a relationship that's sanctified by the sacrament of matrimony, that the church leaders have to accompany those people as they discern the right conscience for themselves. That we cannot impose a solution, but we have to help them by sharing with them the teachings of the church, the values upon which those teachings are based, and then respect the fact that they will come to their own solution. In the case of the Chad bishops, they say that that solution might even include the decision to use condoms to try to reduce the risk of spreading the infection to the uninfected spouse, as long as that choice is based on trying to preserve life and to continue the marriage, and not simply based on a contraceptive choice. Well, I think, first of all, the challenge is one of making sure that we understand well our theology, because I still do meet members of the clergy who say AIDS is a punishment from God, and yet I do not see within our Catholic theology a reason to use that excuse. We do not believe in a God who punishes through illness. We understand that illness is part of the human condition, which is not a perfect condition, but that God doesn't send forth a thunderbolt with an illness if someone has behaved outside of the church's teaching. And also we know that there are many people who become infected who have not behaved outside of the church's teaching either. So I think we need to understand well our own theology and not use the excuse of AIDS being a punishment from God, because I think that then leads many people who think they are faithful people to discriminate against and stigmatize people who are living with or affected by HIV. The second thing is to understand our teaching about God's unconditional love of all people and the fact that we are one body of Christ, and then to look at the practical implications of that teaching by understanding that we are all sisters and brothers. In a sense, we are all living with HIV, even if we don't have the virus inside our bodies, and therefore we need to accept each other, and we need to respond to the particular needs that people living with HIV have and can expect from the church in terms of a holistic response. That's an interesting question for me, and it's one I've been trying to discern the answer of for the past 24 years. I have to confess that I did not choose at first to become involved in this area. I was working at the General Secretariat of Caritas Internationalis in Vatican City when, in 1987, our confederation chose HIV as one of its priority areas of concern. After the General Assembly, all 500 participants in the General Assembly go back to their home countries and expect the staff in Rome to do something about the decisions they made. The General Secretary of the organization approached me and said, no one else in the Secretariat seems to be willing to work on this issue. Will you do so? And I said yes, but I needed to learn a great deal about HIV. In the past 24 years, I can say that it now is my choice to work on this issue. And I think for a number of reasons. One is, first of all, I do think that people living with and affected by HIV are among some of the most stigmatized and marginalized people. And I believe that as a Catholic priest and as a person of faith, that I have an obligation to walk with them and to learn from them. And I have learned a great deal from people living with HIV. First of all, I've learned some of the most important teachings of our church that I learned in an abstract fashion in studying theology, but I've learned very practically now from them as they prioritize their relationship with God, even as they lose a great deal of control in their physical, social, economic lives. So it's helped me to put into perspective and prioritize my own values as well. And then also, I've learned a much better sense of hope. It's one thing to preach about hope from the pulpit. It's another thing to walk next to someone who lives hope. And I can say that, again, as a person of faith, I've grown in my sense of hope by watching the response of people living with HIV.